Welcome to the Create More Value podcast, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, the boutique shareholder value improvement advisory firm. Create More Value is a series of conversations with senior executives, board members, investors, and other experts that have overcome challenges to create exceptional value for their companies. There are many ways to drive value, so we cover a wide range of topics. I am the host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. I would like to welcome Jana Croom. Thank you, Jana, for joining me on our Fortuna Advisors podcast, Create More Value.
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, Greg.
Thank you. Jana Croom is the Chief Financial Officer for Kimball Electronics, a global electronics manufacturing company. She prides herself on being a people champion who understands that financial success is human-centered. As a CFO, Jana drives strategic focus and prioritization, balancing customer, employee, and investor expectations. Jana is a member of the board of directors for First Energy, a Midwest publicly listed electric utility, where she serves on the audit committee and the corporate governance, corporate responsibility, and political oversight committees. She is a member of Diligence 50 Under 50 Next Generation Board Leaders, Russell Reynolds Black CFO Roundtable, and the Manufacturers Alliance's CFO Council. Jana was part of the inaugural class of the McKinsey & Company Black Executive Leadership Program. Jana is passionate about developing the next generation of finance leaders with a specific lens for diversity and is involved in many development programs offered by her company and externally. So to kick us off, Kimball Electronics uses economic value added, known as EVA. Can you tell us a bit about what EVA is and how it's used at Kimball?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think increasingly one that's getting a lot of notice in the marketplace. What is EVA as a measurement of the success of a company? And so basically EVA is just what is the economic profit that your company is generating after the cost of capital deployed for that. And so think net operating profit after tax, less the, weighted average cost of capital times the capital that you've deployed, right? So how much did it cost me to deploy this capital? What is my profit after tax? The tax piece is important. And how am I making the organization better through economic profit as a measurement?
Mm-hmm.
And I love EVA because it really takes everything into consideration. I think CFOs have particular bents. I'm more of a balance sheet CFO because I had someone once tell me 30 years ago, beat the balance sheet and your earnings fall out. And it stuck with me. And I really do think that's true. Good balance sheet hygiene really matters.
Oh, that's a pretty cool line. I had not heard that before. That's good. I think, as you know, I spent over a decade with Stern Stewart, the EVA company. So, one of the things I like about EVA is just what you just said about it being a complete measure. So many other measures are incomplete. They measure just the P&L, or if they do measure the balance sheet, their rate of return measures. So they measure quality but not quantity. Growth doesn't factor in. It's a very complete type of measure. So Kimball's been using it for a while. How has EVA affected planning and decision making, and how do you think it affects the results of the organization?
Yeah, and so to be clear, the philosophy of economic profit predates me as CFO to Kimball. But it is one of the reasons why I was very excited to join Kimball as CFO because of the longstanding philosophy of the company around really a holistic view of the company. So think of it as a holistic view of the health of the patient, right? So we're not just concerned about P&L. We're not just concerned about balance sheet or free cash flow. It's how do all of these things integrate together and give you a holistic view of the company. And unlike many companies, for a long time, profit sharing bonus, also known as STIP, is calculated and paid out formulaically based on economic profit. And so from the shop floor to the top floor, everybody at Kimball can tell you the value of economic profit. And while they may not be able to tell you all of the technical components, they know that inventory matters. They know that turns and days outstanding and cash management matters. They know that the bill of materials and cost of goods sold and operational efficiency matter in determining the profitability of the company. They know how much that SMT line cost. They know the return that they're getting charged for that SMT line. They know the efficiency and throughput they need to have for that asset that we've invested in. And it drives a philosophy that keeps everybody on the same page. And you said it right. Financial outcomes are human-centered, right? The people have to understand how the targets are set, how they're measured, why they matter, right? Because the why determines the how. And so getting everybody to understand the why enables us as a company to move everybody forward in the same direction.
No, that's really great. You said right down to the shop floor. So I want to ask a question that often comes up when I'm speaking to people about different types of economic profit measures. How well do the non-financial people at various levels of the organization actually understand economic profit and how they influence it? Do you think people understand it very well? I know you weren't there when it was implemented, but was it difficult to get people to understand it and use it?
I was actually very pleasantly surprised when I joined Kimball how much financial literacy and dexterity there is throughout the organization, and how much everyone from the quality manager to the materials managers, most definitely the GMs, business development, how much on the commercial side, how much everyone really does understand economic profit. The quoting team intimately understands, right? If we don't get this quote right, the impact that it's going to have. There is a fair amount of financial literacy at Kimball that's happened over decades, right? So the other thing I would say is if you don't have a lot of financial literacy outside of the finance organization, begin that, but know that it will take time and muscle to develop, and that you have to be consistent in that approach. The one thing that I will say too is the finance organization, me in particular, we spend a lot of time with our partners throughout the organization. The most important people that I talk to in the organization are actually not my finance team, right? It's everyone else. It's my relationship with the COO, my relationship with the chief commercial officer, my relationship with the chief human resources officer as we're thinking strategically about upskilling workforce into the future, AI automation, and how we're investing for future growth. Those conversations and then working its way through the organization. I spend a decent amount of time in the plants I love talking to the materials manager. Let's go to the warehouse. But this is the way that you really get the philosophy going in an organization, and you maintain the diligence and the discipline.
That's really great. That's really great. I mean, one of the things I hear from people is our people don't have enough financial acumen to, kind of understand this or that. And to me, that's like a cop out. That's an opportunity, right? That's gone missing at the time. It's a blind spot, which can be rectified. And as you said, it takes muscle, it takes time, it takes, you can't just send everybody an email and all of a sudden they understand something. You have to live and breathe it and use it. And your involvement with people in operations and so forth probably helps both in terms of actually helping them to understand, but also it signals a willingness on the part of the finance organization. I mean, in some organizations, finance is viewed like the mafia. and it sounds like you're kind of exactly the opposite. You're trying to be therapists.
I will say this: my predecessor, who I have great respect for, and he and I developed a really great relationship. When I came in CFO, he and I had a 6-month transition. I was a step-up CFO coming into the role. He had been with the company 42 years, right? And so Kimball was literally his baby. And we spent 6 months together. And Mike was a really great CFO, but he was the CFO of no, right? And so it was sort of his job to come in, like you said, the mafia. He was the enforcer. I had a lot of conversations with him, a lot of heart-to-heart conversations with him and Mike grew up in audit and then worked his way through accounting. He was a CPA. I grew up in financial planning and analysis and then in operations back to FP&A. And so I actually spent time in operations, right? Like I say, in the mud with the people who are doing it every day. And it gives you a different lens. And then in financial planning and strategy, business decision and support. And so really marrying those two, and I will say, I have a lot of gratitude to my previous organization for being very intentional about the roles that I had and cultivating me into a leader. My philosophy is I want to be the CFO of yes and. Yes, we can do that. And you're going to give me a return on invested capital of X. Yes, we can do that. And then really helping people understand the and, right? Again, the why determines the how. And so helping people understand the strategic mind of leadership at all levels of the organization, right? Then the focus, we're all in this together. And so you're not the CFO mafia. More and more, since I've joined the company, there are a lot more people who reach out to me, to the director of corporate development, to our treasurer, and say, hey, I want to do this. Help me figure out how. Right?
That's good. That's good.
And so cultivating those, and then we get to be involved on the front end while you're trying to figure out, can we win this book of business, this program, this expansion, versus having them fully bake it and bring it to you on the back end. And then you have to say no because it doesn't meet certain threshold and criteria.
You reminded me of something a former partner of mine, Bennett Stewart, said many years ago and stuck with me. In fact, I wrote about it in my book. He said, in most companies, capital is free, so it has to be tightly controlled. But in an EVA company, capital is expensive, so you can make it more freely available, knowing that if they don't earn a return on it, the economic profit's going to go down and they're going to get paid less money. People tend to treat the capital more like it's their own money in an EVA company than they do in other companies. And that's, I think, why you wind up with this sort of tight controlling mindset in finance, is because what they're trying to control is free to everybody else. So, so it's kind of cool. So you and I met when Jeff Green, a colleague of mine, and I interviewed you for our article, Driving Out Performance, the Power and Potential of Economic Profit, where we studied the success of companies using EVA and other forms of economic profit in their compensation. And just a couple of highlights on that just while we're on the topic. And I'll put a link to the article in the episode notes. But in that article, we found that on average, the companies in the study outperformed the market by 7% a year in total shareholder return, which was really quite outstanding. Now, when we interviewed you, we were looking for some of the sort of things you do different to give the article some sort of case examples in addition to the sort of study findings. And you said something very interesting that really stuck with me, because very often when I tell people about economic profit, they say, well, but we separately have a target for reducing inventory, so we don't have to worry about that. But you said sometimes it's actually better to have more inventory.
Yeah.
And your answer and your explanation of that was quite fascinating. So I wanted to bring that up again. And can you explain why sometimes it's better to have more inventory?
Yeah. So, the time that we were speaking, we were coming out of COVID and the supply chain was unstable. And you were ordering inventory, being told that it was going to be here in 120 days, and 110 days in, you were finding out that shipment was not coming. And so just-in-time inventory was not working. And Kimball is 50% automotive, right? The worst thing you can do is cause a force majeure to the OEM because you're in the supply chain and you can't deliver. And so increasingly we had customers coming to us and saying, we need you to hold more inventory. We need more safety stock. We're really concerned. And my comment is, absolutely. Yes. And I need return on invested capital for the inventory that I'm holding for you. Because if I only have $1, that dollar has to earn, right? And so it doesn't matter what I'm investing it in. I'm happy to invest in your inventory for you and be a good supply chain partner. And you're happy to give me the return required for that. And so this is a win-win. And so increasingly, I will say they were not happy with giving the return. And anybody who follows Kimball will see we've significantly reduced our inventories. but it's really helping everyone understand the why again, and then
Mm-hmm.
the how of, all right, you want me to hold more inventory. The supply chain is wonky.
Mm-hmm.
I also believe everything is a pendulum that swings too far. We had all this inventory on our books. We were charging return on invested capital. The customers were saying, well, you're charging us too much. All right, well, then we need to bring our inventory back down.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll see is in the following quarters, that's exactly what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but your job as a supply chain partner is really to just be that,
Mm-hmm.
a partner, and provided you can earn a return to your shareholders, I think your shareholders are just fine with that.
Yeah, that's really, really great. We've seen it also with like payment terms. Sometimes
Mhm.
people get pushed to 60, 90, even 120-day payment terms. And,
But
if
that's
they,
also where supplier financing is a very valuable tool,
yeah,
right? So let your banking partners help you with that.
yeah, we've seen that ourselves. I mean, we're a small private company, and one company wanted to push us to 120-day terms, and we explained how much we'd have to increase our price, and I said to them, I assure you, our cost of capital is higher than your cost of capital, big public
Right.
company. But in the end, they provided their bank wound up financing it so we could get paid in 30 days, and it worked out
Yep.
very well.
Yes.
So to change to a slightly different topic, as we record this now, it's April of 2025. The markets are roiling over the
Mm,
U.S. tariffs. Some days they're up, some days they're down. Never by a small percentage. It's just been very volatile. Every company is affected differently by such policies, but generally, how do you think management teams should assess the impact and develop plans for dealing with such externalities? I mean, they happen all the time. They're different
yeah.
types of externalities, but how is it best to deal with those kinds of things?
This is such an unprecedented time. I think corporate leadership is used to dealing with known knowns and known unknowns. Where we struggle is the unknown unknowns.
Hmm.
I don't understand what the true end game of this administration is. What are we after? Are we after trade parity or more of a trade balance? Are we after lower interest rates? Are we like, what is really the end game that we're driving to? And so it makes it very, very difficult to plan, right? And so I grew up in FP&A. So scenario analysis
Hmm.
as a basis for strategy is sort of what I live by, right? You run all the different scenarios and then you say strategically, what are the probabilities of X? And that's how you plan. It's increasingly difficult to do in this environment where you don't know from day to day, week to week, what's the end game and
Hmm.
what we're planning for. And this is the struggle of politics intertwining with a free capital environment and the capital markets.
Hmm.
And so, what I would say is very contrary to what you might think from a CFO, which is you can't overly plan for it
Hmm.
um, because your best efforts are going to be wrong.
Hmm.
And so, what you have to do is risk manage and you have to be agile. Now, that's very
Hmm.
hard to do in an electronics manufacturing environment, right? Our contracts from quote to production is about 18 to 24 months, and then you're going to produce for 7 to 10 years. And so, agility is not what this industry is known for.
Right.
And we have a lot of customers who are trying to decide, do we site this in Mexico? Do we site it in the US? Do
Hmm.
we take it overseas? And we stand ready to serve, but there is just a certain dexterity and agility that leaders are going to have in this environment. And it's a different muscle,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so you also can't be overly dedicated to the concrete that you used to know,
Hmm.
right? And so it used to be, all right, this is what we did in the past. There really is not a good past
Hmm.
precedent. And so you have to really think about what is the art of the possible? How will we shape this? For us, it's been really important to have meaningful conversations with our customers, to
Hmm.
stay very close to them in this environment because what
Hmm.
they're thinking matters, right? And
Hmm.
so understanding their strategies and ways that we can support them
Hmm.
is very important. But beyond that, I also think that there's something to be said for just good gut instinct. and really a lot of collaboration and then trust as you move forward.
That's great. I just want to make a comment before I go to my next question about agility, because it's come up with so many of my clients over the last 30 plus years of my consulting career. Very often they wind up not being agile enough by accident because of some of the cost cutting programs that they've done. Sometimes in the process of trying to get to a lower cost, they convert what was a variable cost to a fixed cost, doing something internal instead of external. And they save a few shekels, but they've now created a fixed cost that makes them less agile. And so a lot of times, you have to consciously think about, trying to maintain agility. Another one I've seen is, companies that acquire companies and then integrate them so fully that if they ever change their mind, then they want to separate the company out. It's a massive thing to untangle it. And, they did that integration sometimes to shared services will save, again, a few shekels, but they wind up, decreasing their flexibility on how they manage the portfolio. So I think agility is not something that you just, there's a sort of culture of agility, but there's also how you set up your business model can affect how agile you are as well.
And that's, you bring up a really good point for anyone who has studied Kimball, particularly in the past few years. We have had some very significant revenue setbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say not our fault, but definitely our problem, where we lost two significant revenue streams. And as a leadership team, we really had to work through, all right, what does right sizing the cost structure look like? And then what are you giving up? What are the intended consequences? Is it better in the short run to deliver a lower return to your shareholders to prepare for the longer term growth and opportunity of the company? And we also sold off a division, our GES, our automated test and measurement division. And I will tell you that divestiture was much easier because it had not been fully integrated into the company. And so we were able to unwind that. And, the transition support is the TSA is always one of the most contentious and the last thing that you're negotiating when you're either buying or selling an asset. And so not having it fully integrated actually made that process and that negotiation much easier. And so I agree with you. There is a tendency at times to be so myopically focused or so short-term focused that it seems like a good decision in the now.
Yeah.
You always have to be thinking, and part of the roles is not just CFO, but leaders in organizations is, can you be an objective third-party observer of your organization's short and long-term strategy, right? So can you almost remove yourself from your body and hover over the room and listen to the discussion you're having as the leadership team as a third-party independent observer? What are you hearing? And there are times that I strongly recommend, as you're evaluating options, particularly in this tumultuous market where, everybody's saying, we don't know what our earnings power is going to be. Are we headed into global recession? Is the consumer going to pull back? Because fear can be a strong motivator of really bad decisions. Leave the room and walk away from it and think about the leadership discussion you were having and say, how is my self 3 years from now going to feel about the decisions we're trying to make today? How is myself 5 years from now going to feel about the decisions we're making today? Objectively, as an objective observer. And then come back and have the conversation again and see if the decisions that you're thinking about change.
That's great advice. So let's take a step away from the present and talk about the future. How is the company deciding on where it wants to be several years down the road, and what types of investments will be needed to get there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate the fact that we're actually going to be airing this podcast after I release my earnings call. We're going to be announcing on the earnings call that we have invested in a state-of-the-art CMO, which is contract manufacturing facility in Indiana, to focus on the medical CMO market. It's a market that is fragmented, that has tremendous opportunity for growth. The breadth and depth of opportunity is significant, but it is similarly situated to EMS in a way that the value of our ingenuity and quality and all of those things transfers very easily into that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very intentional decision that we made as a leadership team
Mm-hmm.
to say, where is the future of Kimball? And we love the EMS business. It's our bread and butter. It is our core business. It is, what we grew up, but we recognize increasingly that we have to diversify. We need to improve margin and return to our shareholders. And we really feel strongly that CMO is a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
EMS under natural terms throws off a fair amount of free cash flow, right? When you're not in an inventory constrained environment. And the question becomes how to best utilize that cash for betterment, this philosophy of betterment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, you should give it back to your shareholders. But we really think that investing in the CMO for future growth is the right decision to make. And it's not one that we entered into lightly because, as I said, Kimball has had some, significant revenue impacts.
Mm-hmm.
But our balance sheet is really strong. And again, you can't be driven by the now. You have to really be thinking because 3 years is going to come one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Did you make the right decisions to invest for the future? Or were you overly focused on now? And I'll bring it back to EVA. That's where EVA is so powerful because when you're modeling out the decision and you're thinking through, is this the best choice of capital deployment for our shareholders? You go back to, all right, what economic profit is this going to deliver?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that really aids you in the decision making.
Yeah, I think of all the points in time when a company is aided by using an economic profit measure, I think when contemplating a big investment, it's that capital charge is going up.
Right.
You better
Right.
get some NOPAT.
Yes. Yes. And where you
And
source it matters because the after tax piece is
yeah, yeah,
important,
yeah,
particularly as a global company.
yeah. So, as a very successful, diverse executive, what do you think can and should be done to increase the percentages of diverse executives going forward?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so many things. And as you were reading off my bio, I think, it's fairly evident that I'm involved in a fair amount of diverse organizations, et cetera. McKinsey started and I was part of the inaugural class, Black Executive Leadership Program. And it was really geared towards directors who were looking to move into VP roles and then from VP roles into C-suite roles. And the program was, fairly rigorous. And it was really around what are the leadership skills that you need to build to be a good leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say corporations also have to be mindful. And you can't, to be effective, you can't just start at the director level. You have to think about your analysts, your managers, your high potential employees. What are the opportunities that you're giving them in terms of participating on this project? Do they
Mm-hmm.
need to go and take this role in the corporation? I remember, being told when I was at NiSource that I was going to be leaving a job that I loved and was really good at to go do something I knew nothing about. But they recognized it was a muscle I needed to develop.
Mm-hmm.
They were thinking about the end game,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so corporations have to be really, really intentional about the end game. I was listening to someone, and I can't remember who she was, but she was talking about more women in STEM. And she said, if you want more women in STEM, you've got to start when they're in the 8th grade, right? Because they need to be taking biology in the 9th grade and then chemistry and then physics and just, what are all the skill sets that they need? And if you're talking to them senior year of high school, it may be too late.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is you have to reach further down into the organization with great intentionality. And similar to developing financial acumen in an organization, it develops over time.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be consistent about the work that you're doing. or else you're going to look 3-5 years down the road and say, well, we haven't made the progress that we wanted to make. And so that's also why I see organizations sort of stepping away from DEI sort of 3 years into a DEI journey. And I think you're not going to see the progress because you haven't stuck with it long enough. Our EVA journey is a decades-long journey. Creating more diverse executives has to be a decades-long pursuit, and that you have to deal with some intentionality. I think mentoring is incredibly important, but advocacy is also important. And what I will say, so Kimball has a number of ERGs, and the Black ERG at Kimball, the Chief Operating Officer, Steve Korn, is the executive sponsor. And I remember the leadership team having a candid conversation and them saying, Jana, do you want to be the executive sponsor? And Steve saying, but I want to be the executive sponsor. And it was really a great conversation because Steve, as a white male COO, is the best executive sponsor that they could have, right? It gives him chance to engage and interact and meet more people. And the allyship that he will develop as a leader is perhaps more powerful than what I could offer as a Black female executive. And so really just leadership leaning in a meaningful way is powerful and important. But the other thing I would say is it can't be just a lot of work with no outcomes, because I've seen organizations where you created these high potential lists and all these special projects, and you got a lot of great work out of some really talented people. And then when time came for promotion opportunity, they weren't given the promotion. And guess what they did? They left that organization and they took their talents elsewhere. And so as I think about resource and investment, it's not just financial. It really is human-centered. It's people. Why are you going to invest all of this time in building someone into a great leader, giving them opportunities to, through special projects, to develop and hone skills for them to go work for someone else? Right? I don't want my best and brightest and most talented to go work for my competitors. I want to keep them here. And so it also means that at times you may have to create promotional opportunities or one-off roles for someone to keep them growing and engaged for higher levels of leadership. And that is an investment, right? But good corporations are willing to do it. And the last thing that I'll add, and a shout out to Black Women on Boards, which is an organization that was created by Marlene Santil and Robin Washington around having more Black women on corporate boards. The power that the board has in the room to really be stewards and help with the responsibility and accountability of corporate management teams to be very thoughtful of diverse perspectives in the room broadly is really powerful. But in order for that to be in effect, we have to be on the boards and in the room. And so that is very, very important. And I will say there are things and perspectives that diverse thought has that really save organizations from making bad choices. Now, I remember talking to an executive, not at Kimball. We were at an investor conference and he was like, yeah, tariffs, I think everything's going to be fine. And I told him, you don't know enough middle-class people. You don't know enough poor people. And this is economically impacting everyone. But his perspective was his line of sight for who he engages with every day. People he engaged with every day, perhaps not as economically sensitive, right? And so that's why diverse perspectives are really, really important, particularly as you're thinking about shaping corporate strategy into the future. It helps the organization. It's not just a good thing to do because you feel good at the end of the day. It really will drive value, strategic insights, and better outcomes for your organization done well.
Well, that was a really great response. And a lot of what you said resonated with me. When I was at Credit Suisse, I was appointed to the Diversity Advisory Council. And I actually, you talked about mentoring and advocacy. I initiated actually a mentoring program, but not at the most junior level like you were describing. We had a slightly different problem. We didn't have trouble attracting women and minorities at the analyst and associate level, but they tended to leave us at the VP level, and trying to make them feel more like part of the team, in what, like, for many investment banks, is a largely white male dominated culture, more so than many other industries. That program was unbelievably successful at helping to retain people and helping to give them opportunity. I think that's you're spot on with that. I mean, that I think is one really important part of this, and I do agree with you with the the in the boardroom you mentioned the diverse thinking. When
Yeah.
people come from different backgrounds, I mean, I experienced that when I lived in London. I had a small team, 35 people in my office, or in my team, 13 different passports, and some of
Yeah.
the Northern Europeans and the Southern Europeans thought so differently that just putting them in the same room, led to very different things. But I think what you're doing to advocate and help, you're a great role model for people, but also what you're doing to try to help them is very good as well. So on
And
that
you
note,
bring up a really good point
I'm
around
sorry.
a global population, right? We operate in multiple continents, and there are so many cultural differences that you have to be really aware of
Mm-hmm.
and thoughtful of as you're engaging customers abroad. But having those diverse voices to help guide you through that
Yeah.
matters so much.
Yeah, I think it keeps you from making so many mistakes that when you have one mindset you don't think of, but somebody that comes from a different culture or different background.
Mistakes cost money.
Yeah, yeah. But by the way, years ago I read the book Team of Rivals about
Mhm.
Abraham Lincoln, and he put all of the people he competed with to get the nomination in his cabinet, and they all had completely different points of view. And basically, the story of the book basically is he never could have kept the country whole if he didn't have such a diverse cabinet. And, they just challenged him on everything, and
Yes.
that just made all the decisions better. So my last question is, you've seen many things in your time as a CFO, and getting there. One audience that we cherish a lot for this podcast are people that are aspiring to be CFO.
Yeah.
So what sort of advice do you have for either new CFOs or people that are aspiring to get in the seat of the CFO?
So there are a few pieces of advice I would say. The first is find a CFO that you admire and really study their career, right? And so it's when I was starting to do earnings calls, I would pick CFOs that I liked and I would listen to their earnings calls, listen to how they answered
Mm,
questions, listen to how they responded during challenging times.
mm,
I love the fact that earnings calls, the archive is rich and deep, right? And so you can go back to a specific period of time and you
mm,
can see how that CFO showed up. And so I think that there is really great value in studying. Find a mentor. That is really important. Find a mentor that can help you. And another CFO may not be the best mentor, right? It may be a CEO or a COO, but someone who can help you as you're guiding your career. And be open. Be open to opportunities. Be open to engagement. Be open to feedback. Feedback is not always easy to hear.
mm,
As someone who's gotten a lot of feedback over her career,
mm.
some of it heartbreaking, but feedback makes you better if you're willing to listen
Mhm,
and you're willing to evolve, right? And so, what's the end game? Do you want to talk to people who tell you you're shiny and pretty and great all the time? That does not help you grow,
mhm,
right? It's the people who are willing to have honest engagement about the things that you do really well, but also the things that you need to grow and advance in
mhm,
to be better. Be perceived as a strategic partner.
mm,
Again, the most important relationships a CFO needs to have are not the relationships in the finance organization. It's the rest of the organization. What's
mhm,
happening in operations? Do you have your finger to the pulse of what's actually happening where the magic happens, right?
mhm,
Which is in the plants with the people. And increasingly, if you're part of a global company, presence is really important. And so being where the people are, listening to them. I actually, early on in my career, worked for someone, and you could not bring this person any bad news.
Hmm.
And because you could not bring this person any bad news, people tended to withhold until they absolutely had to disclose it. And at that point, it's really hard to fix. Being known for being someone collaborative that people want to come and bring strategic challenges to, that helps them solve problems, right? How you react as a leader in your organization determines how people perceive you and receive you, right? And so that matters. And so that's just something to be very, very mindful of as you're pursuing the path to CFO. Be perceived as a strategic partner who likes to help solve problems. Be naturally curious. Some of the best leaders in corporate America, God bless my mother. She says when I was growing up, my favorite question was why. I think a natural intellectual curiosity and an openness serves you really well. People come to me and bring things, and it's like, all right, well, why do you want, and by the time the 5 whys, I think, is a really great book. By the time you get to the 5th why, it's like, oh, this is what you're after. Let's try and figure out that. But if you just stop at the initial conversation, you may miss a great opportunity to understand something very powerful that can move the organization forward. So be curious.
That's way beyond just becoming a CFO. That's great life advice, I would say. Very good.
Also works with raising teenagers.
That's good. I don't have any of those anymore, unfortunately. But well, thank you very much. We've been speaking with Jana Croom. Thank you, Jana, so much for joining me for this very important conversation.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure, Greg.
You have been listening to Create More Value, sponsored by Fortuna Advisors, and I am your host, Greg Milano, founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Fortuna Advisors helps companies with strategy, capital deployment, business management, corporate culture, and incentive compensation, all aimed at driving top quartile total shareholder return and the equivalent for private companies. To learn more, contact us at info@fortuna-advisors.com.